We come back, we come back, we come back.
We're much more fun than those. This one out back.
No, I'm watching Jeff.
Okay,
Is Reed here?
I see the one, and we come back.
Maybe just should have done.
I'd like to call to order tonight's study session of September 25th, 2023
Microphone.
at 6 p.m. All right, and is Patrick online? There he is. So all are in attendance except for Councilmember Stewart, and he did call in. So do I have a motion to excuse him?
I'll make a motion to excuse Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimous. Okay, we move on to number 1 and our only number on tonight's business, and it's affordable housing update. And I will call on Ryan Windish. Maybe I'll call on, okay, I am gonna call on Ryan Windish.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. Good to be here tonight. I'm Ryan Windish, your Community and Economic Development Director, and giving our producer back there a chance to get the presentation up. So tonight, I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive into affordable housing. I know the council's talked about affordable housing a lot over the last couple of years. And this is an opportunity for me to kind of go, like I said, a deep dive as we head into discussions early next year about our 2024 comprehensive plan update. And the objectives for this presentation center around a little bit of background on affordable housing policy that we're looking at, which includes recent state law changes. House Bill 1220 that amended the Growth Management Act, requiring for more specifics relation to affordable housing, which I'll go into. And then also kind of how this ultimately affects how many housing units the city of Sumner needs to be planning for over the next 20 years. And I'll start with the basics. What is affordable housing? And I kind of want to start with the understanding that we all, this intuitively, we all know this. Housing is a basic human need. And one of the reasons affordable housing is so important is that when you have stable, affordable housing and it's near jobs and there's opportunity for employment, it just creates a foundation for achieving your life goals, for education, career advancement, health and wellness, and raising a family. So affordable housing, food, clothing, and shelter, right? Those are the 3 bare bone basics that you need. And affordable housing is part of that. And it's important. And it's a significant challenge to a lot of people in Washington state right now. And again, we'll go into some of the numbers around that. And as local governments, we can do a certain amount to, provide for, encourage, and accommodate affordable housing. And so what is affordable housing? So there's a couple basic definitions. One is that housing is affordable when the total housing costs, rent or home payments, dues plus utilities do not exceed 30% of the gross household income. So that could be any income, right? You could be making $1 million a year and you could still buy a house that's unaffordable if you buy a high enough cost of a house. But basically, if you're not spending, you shouldn't be spending more than 30% of your gross household income, which is also the metric that's used when you're applying for a home loan. They want to know kind of what debt you're carrying and they want to make sure that your mortgage and everything doesn't exceed 30% of your household income. And the state defines this in the RCWs. For rental housing, it's the 30% of your monthly income towards rent and utilities, and not counting the telephone. And for home ownership, it's no more than 38% of the monthly income for mortgage, taxes, homeowners insurance, and fees. And then they also take a look at your total household debt, and it should be no more than 45% of your monthly income. And that total household debt includes other loans you might have for a car or credit card debt, kind of thing. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of what kind of this means and more like real numbers, I guess, well, first of all, when we look at what income segment are we really focused on for affordable housing initiatives and changes? It's those earning 80% or less of the area median income. And the area median income for Tacoma Pierce County is 85,500. And so 80% of that would be 68,400. And that's the number that the Housing and Urban Development, Federal Housing and Urban Development Department uses to kind of get a handle on what is considered affordable for which income groups. So again, just to kind of underscore it, much of, if not all of what we're focused on when it comes to affordable housing programs and incentives is for units that would accommodate those earning 80% or less of AMI. Once you get over 80%, then the market opens up and you can actually afford to purchase a home or rent a home and not exceed that 30% of your household income per month. And some background, I feel like I've talked about this quite a bit, but I think it's still super important that the council went through the process of doing a housing needs assessment, adopted a housing action plan in 2021 that had 14 prioritized goals that the council took on and adopted a lot of changes over the last couple of years to incentivize affordable housing, including multifamily tax exemption, expansion, updating our accessory dwelling unit code, creating incentives for affordable senior housing, and I could go on. So the council's been doing a lot of work in this area already. And as we look at the 2024 comp plan update, we're required by the state to even do more work. So I'll go into that as we go along here. And this is a infographic that came out of it's in the housing needs assessment that we did in 2020 and 2021. And so these numbers are a little dated, but still, I think, relevant and important to kind of keep our minds around kind of what the current situation is with the affordability of both renters in the community and homeowners. And what this shows is that for renters in particular, high percentage of them are cost burdened. Kind of back to that 30% of your gross household income number. If you're paying more than 30%, you're considered cost burdened. And 13% are severely cost burdened, which means those households are paying more than 50% of their gross household income towards housing. And home ownership's a little bit better. Well, it's quite a bit better, actually, but still 12% cost burdened and 13% severely cost burdened. And these are 2014, 2018 numbers. And we all know that housing has gotten only more expensive since these numbers came out. So things are probably worse now than they were. But I wanted to grab this document because it was a nice infographic that was handy, kind of hitting home kind of what's our current situation, or at least relatively current situation. Yes.
Good.
Is the percentage on family income or individual?
It's a good question. It's based on the household income. So a household could be a single person, or it could be a family of four or whatever. So it's based on your household income.
Alright.
So if two people worked, it's combining them. Okay.
Correct. And then this infographic is also in the housing needs assessment. And it does a nice job, I think, of kind of relating incomes so the bottom line, you can see there's different positions. There's a senior center aide, permit tech, assistant city engineer, market analyst. And some of these positions could even be with like the city of Sumner. And we were in partnership with the city of Bonnie Lake on this study as well. So kind of the idea is, what could a person working in as a senior center aide, making around 40,000 a year, what could they afford in the community? And you can see there in the 30 to 50% AMI. And so you kind of go up through and kind of see. So the star indicates at this point in time what the average rent was in the area. And, you need to be making, the permit tech looks like they could probably afford rent at $56,000 a year in income. And then, of course, as you continue to move up, things get more affordable if you're the higher income. But still, you're getting into, the upper management to some degree, at least typically higher education for certain amounts of income and attainment. And it's a challenge. And as we know, housing prices have gone up. So I've kind of shown on the 2023 median house sales price, 574,500. I got that from realtor.com. So things are, as we all know, even more difficult to obtain affordable housing over the last year or so. I also pulled the fair market rents for the Tacoma metro area. Again, the Housing and Urban Development looks at what's considered a fair market rent, and then they'll use these numbers to figure out what's considered affordable rent for median and low income households. And for example, when the East Sumner apartments that are under construction right now, so they're being built where the Windmill Gardens used to be, 160 some units there, and they've gone ahead and committed to 20% of those units being affordable to moderate and low income households. And so I go to the website where they have fair market rents, and I look all that up to make sure the rents that they're going to be charging are going to meet the affordability standards for HUD. And this is the fair market rents they have calculated for the Pierce County Tacoma area, and you can see that rents are high, especially as you get into 2024. Trying to give you a picture of what affordability looks like or lack thereof in town. Yes.
That include homes and apartments, or were you just looking at apartments?
This is just apartments. Yeah, good question.
Patrick has his hand up. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment that looking at those prices, I don't know that there's anything in Sumner that's at that level currently, that's available anyway, or that's less than a year of waiting list. It's quite a big discrepancy between where we are currently and what the averages are.
So,
Go ahead, Ben.
I haven't, I don't know what the rental rates are, but this is the affordable rates?
No, this is just, sorry, excuse me, fair market rates.
Oh,
Yeah,
fair,
so
okay,
this isn't the
great,
affordable rates. This
because
is kind of
this
what's,
is like blocks.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah. And when I took a look at, so anyhow, Councilmember Reed was saying that I wasn't 100% understanding if Councilmember Reed, are you saying that these rates are lower than what is happening in Sumner right now, or it's higher, or?
Yeah, what's showing here is less than what it costs for apartments in Sumner right now.
Okay.
And some of that, you remember, this is the Tacoma metro area, so it's aggregating a lot of data into one table here. Obviously, you're gonna be somewhere 50% above or 50% below. You're not gonna be right here. So it doesn't surprise me that rents here are more expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, my understanding, like right next to Fred Meyer, the studios there start at like 1,900.
Sounds. Right. And then this is a graphic taken from the US Census Bureau for their 2021 data for median household income in Sumner. And the different areas are called block groups and indicating, different income levels for different parts of town. And not too surprisingly, as you move up the hill, the dark blue is higher incomes. And then as you come down to the valley and different parts of town, particularly kind of north of Maine and east of Valley, the incomes are lower. And then, it varies throughout the city, but I think it's important to kind of keep in mind where those areas are in town. You also kind of notice that typically single family neighborhoods where you have single family homes, higher incomes, because those are typically more expensive properties than renting. And that'll be a theme that's going to kind of run through all of this.
Go ahead, Charlotte.
He's right. I'm probably just generalizing, but to your knowledge, do those also kind of coincide with newer homes versus older homes? Like I'm looking at like the lower incomes retirees who have probably been in the homes for several decades, as opposed to then higher incomes having purchased their homes more recently.
Yeah, I would say generally, kind of looking at the map, particularly the area 3 there, south of 410. We have some newer homes down in there, relatively speaking. A lot of single family down in there. And I think even area 5, maybe bleeding over into area 2, we have some newer homes that have come online just in the last year that are really expensive. And so that area might end up coming up some, area 5 by in 2023, if you looked at the data there. But the most recent data we have was 2021.
Okay, I just want to keep in mind, like, we're talking about retirees versus that being a place where people can afford to come in now.
Correct. Yeah, good point.
Thanks.
Oh, yes.
So can you explain this 1222221? I mean, there's on the right side, what does that mean? And then
I don't know what that means, actually. They gave me, they gave me some options for creating the legend as I pulled the data into a map. And I think what I asked for was it to be distributed evenly, and that's what it spit out. I don't know what the 12221 is.
It looks like it's the total of the geographies, like how many geographic areas. you
Or
want them to
okay,
pull.
maybe that's it.
And
There you go.
okay.
Okay, thank you.
2 dark blue, 2 light blue. Is that what it is?
Well, it's, yeah.
If you look,
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I see.
so
Got
the
it.
highest income, it said there's one, and there's only one dark.
Oh, right. I got it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you for helping me decide that. I don't know what it means. They're just numbers. And then the other thing that the council has done as recently is joined the South Sound Housing Affordability Partnership. And I know I've mentioned this coalition before, but just a reminder, Pierce County and a number of different cities, including Tacoma, Puyallup, Sumner, Fife, and others are part of this coalition. And it's really modeled after similar affordable housing partnerships, particularly one that's happens in King County called Arch. And the idea is that this partnership has an executive director who's spoken here recently about the 1406 funding. And it's really to look at policy development and reviewing that with cities, legislative advocacy, and also ultimately one of their roles will be to pursue capital projects, both purchasing and building or buying housing for affordable options. And I know recently we've been having some discussions about 1406 funding. Jason had an update on that he was going to share.
Sure. As Ryan mentioned, one of the goals of SHAPE is to effectively use the limited resources that we get through our 1406 funding the most effectively. And over the last several months, there's been several discussions between participating jurisdictions about pooling those funds together for a greater benefit. And SHAPE has put together a proposal that'll be going to the SHAPE Executive Board in November for consideration that would allow a process to be set up for cities to direct their $1406 there. To date, we've collected about $150,000 of 1406 money. And just as a reminder, that's a state shared sales tax revenue that's good for 20 years. City of Sumner will receive about $55,000 a year for the next 20 years. Because this process is finally set up, or assuming that it'll be approved by the board here in November, it would be appropriate for us as a city to then divert or allocate some of our funds over to SHAPE. So at the mid-buy, I'll be recommending that council allocate $125,000 worth of funding to SHAPE for their capital program in 2024. Now, like I said, we have about $150,000 in there. That $125,000 represents the revenues that we received in 2021 and 2022. I chose that number so when we go into the biennial budget next year, council then could allocate another 2 years worth of funding to the county and SHAPE for funding the capital programs. How this will work is our money will be allocated to SHAPE's administrating agency, which happens to be Pierce County. So they run the administrative side, all the accounting portion essentially. They will do a notice of funding availability in the spring and then award those funds in the summer next year. And then those funds will be spent the following year in 2025. So it is quite a process. But talking to our partners at the county and as well as SHAPE and the city of Fife and city of Auburn, we all feel that pooling our money will give us better projects into the future. Where those projects are built will be part of the notice of funding availability process. And if they happen to be in Sumner, we'll be kept in the loop if those housing projects are to be built here. Any questions about that?
So, Mr. Wilson, who applies to build these and apply for those funds?
Sure. Most of them are non-government organizations. So, it could be a nonprofit, could be a private developer, it could be a number of.
That's in the business of building this kind of housing.
Yeah, it could
They
be.
already know how to do this and make affordable, smaller homes or affordable, smaller apartments or something.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? No? Go ahead.
Keep rolling on here. So now I want to transition into talking about Growth Management Act and housing policy and how we're required to address it as we look at our update to our comprehensive plan. So House Bill 1220, it changed goal 4 housing. So there's 13 goals in the Growth Management Act, and goal 4 is housing. And so the goal states that we will plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all economic segments of the population of the state, promote a variety of residential densities and housing types, and encourage preservation of existing housing stock. And what changed here is instead of saying encourage housing for all economic segments, we now have to demonstrate that we can accommodate housing. And it went on to get far more specific in terms of income bands that I'll show you here in the next slide. This slide helps us understand a couple of things. One, it's looking at Washington State as a whole, and we talk about the need for affordable housing. It's a statewide issue, and looking at future growth in Washington, we're looking at a need for 1.1 million new homes in the next 20 years. And then you can see that there's a breakdown here of income. So the 0 to 30% AMI, we've been talking about area median income. And that's for permanent supportive housing versus non-permanent supportive housing. And then there's 30 to 50% AMI, 50 to 80% AMI, 80 to 120%, and 120% more. And as I mentioned earlier, the focus for affordability is really between that is 80% and less, right, for AMI. And you can see that, the market rate 80% and above is a pretty large percentage of the housing stock that's needed. And then the rest of it is 80% below. The other thing is you go the next level up, I think is interesting and also will come into play here as I get into Sumner's situation, is that if you are making 120% AMI or more, your options for purchasing a standalone single-family home go up. And then as you move down the income bands, multifamily, multiplexes, small multiplexes, and then apartments become the more affordable option. And so those are the housing types that are generally more affordable to the lower income levels.
What makes it a multiplex and not an apartment?
It could be an apartment within a multiplex, but really what that's focused on are your smaller apartment structures. So your duplexes, triplexes, your fourplexes, maybe up to 5 or 6plex. The apartments that are illustrated here would be probably more than 5 units, your 20 units and larger in terms of an apartment development or complex.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Or just like by the train station, those like the townhomes, I think are good examples, and they happen by the fire station too. I think in terms of cases in Sumner where the multiplexes are, we don't have a lot, but that's where they are.
Yeah, we have a pretty good variety north of Main Street. If you go up Valley Avenue, there's lots of fourplexes up there and some sixplexes and duplexes. Yeah, but what's actually, under construction today, I mentioned the East Sumner apartments. Those would be apartments, garden style apartments. And then what's slated for development in the Red Apple and also north of the library are both would be apartments. They're going to be market rate. Those apartments are.
All right, Cindy, go ahead.
Mr. Windisch, that colored line,
Mhm.
that's dollars. That's
That-
their income in dollars?
No, that's numbers of units, housing units needed to accommodate those income bands. So 0 to 30% permanent supportive housing, we need 122,000 or so units
In Washington.
in Washington as a total. Yeah.
Okay. All right, because I think I got confused when I thought you were saying, when we look at single family over there, I thought it was saying you had to make at least $310,000 to be able to buy a single family home, but that has nothing to do with it. That's just how many single family homes we need.
Correct.
Okay.
How many single family homes we need to accommodate the 1.1 million. And that would be the single family home portion of that, like roughly a third of the 1.1 would be
But
single family
wouldn't
homes.
larger cities be taking a bigger percentage of that 1.1 million?
Mhm.
I mean, isn't it all going to be relative type of situation?
Yeah,
You're just showing us what kind of shape the whole state.
the whole
is in.
state is, and part of that's because I'm going to go into Sumner's portion of this and these
Okay.
different income breakdowns. But I kind of wanted to let you, just kind of let it sink in that it's a statewide problem.
Mhm.
And it's income bands and there's units allocated here, just like there will be, I'll show you much smaller numbers, but for Sumner. And then how that translates into the types of housing to accommodate those income levels, because that's going to have an impact on Sumner as well.
And so this is back on shape,
Mhm.
but it says we need almost 10,000 emergency housing beds. Can shape be used for any of that kind of thing? Shape money?
Shape will primarily be, you see that PSH and non-PSH, so that's supportive housing is what that stands for. So my understanding with Shape is their goal is to be supportive housing, not necessarily emergency housing beds.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, and permanent supportive housing is housing that's permanently subsidized in some form by government.
It is.
Mhm.
Okay,
And compared to emergency housing, which is you're trying to get out of being homeless, you've just been evicted or kicked out, or for one reason or another, you are on the street and you need housing right now. And so then there's
Could be a shelter, could be a tiny
shelter,
house,
yeah.
could be.
but we're hoping the people that are those in the lower brackets there are going to be in permanent housing.
Correct. Yeah, that's what it's. And I think I talked about this before, several, and we know, I went over this a couple weeks ago, several state bills related to housing and land use passed over the past few years. And then as we are updating the city's comprehensive plan, there's already been an update to the Pierce County countywide planning policies, which have umbrella policies that cover the county and all the cities in the county. And then Vision 2050 is the regional, Puget Sound Regional Council plan. Anyhow, it all kind of, it's all kind of layered to a certain degree, but they point towards, emphasis on equity, growth near transit for housing, housing options, like we're talking about, different housing opportunities and homeownership opportunities, infill development, anti-displacement, and climate resilience. So all of those topics and concepts are within the policy framework, both at the county and regional level and also at the state level. So I've talked a little bit about House Bill 1220 and what its changes to GMA. So this goes into some more specifics around this. And one of the most fundamental changes is that it requires cities to determine whether the city zoning and available land can accommodate your 2044 housing growth targets for all income levels. And so in the past, we just had to show that we had capacity to accommodate our future housing. Like we have enough land, we have it zoned properly, we're supposed to get X number of units and we can accommodate that. Now we're required to say, okay, you don't just get to accommodate all of it, you need to break it down into different income levels. And so going into that in some detail here in a second. The next slide. We're also supposed to be looking at adjusting our zoning and reducing barriers for affordable housing, being sure that we're being careful that our policies don't result in racial disparities and impacts, particularly displacement or exclusion in housing. And then further down, talk about special housing needs. It requires us to look at allowing permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, and emergency shelters, which had an early deadline. And so the city's already, the council already adopted changes to our transitional housing, emergency shelter standards in the code. All right, so now we're getting into the numbers. What you're looking at here is a summary of the city of Sumner's adopted housing targets at the county level. So the county has allocated a certain number of housing units that we need to, as a county, accommodate and figure out how that's distributed. And so we went through that process at the county level, and the city's portion allocation target for accommodating over the next 20 years or so was 1,985 housing units. And as you can see, and the state broke all this out for us, there's a certain number of units that we're supposed to accommodate for each one of those income bands. So we've seen these income bands earlier for the whole state, and these are the ones now for Sumner. So 0 to 30%, non-permanent supportive housing, 256 units. And then on you can see anyhow the breakdown. Now, when I talk about accommodate, it means we need to be able to demonstrate that our zoning allows for it, and it could happen. The city's not required to go build the housing. We're just required to lay the groundwork for a developer or nonprofit agency to be able to develop it. So,
Ryan, before you go
Yeah.
into this, like, can you just explain, we have to accommodate it. And we've already started to do that through multiple things in our housing action plan.
For sure.
Like
for sure.
ADUs
Yep.
and zero lot line subdivisions. So we're well
Correct.
on our way to
Yeah.
trying to meet these targets. But there's probably some more work that's still gonna need to be done, correct?
Correct.
Of our comprehensive plan.
Yep. And I'll go into why that is the case. On the next slide. So. So I showed you the 19,000, excuse me, the 1,985 number. And then, but what that doesn't account for is that the units we have coming online and the units we're planning for, so the apartments we've been talking about for several months and a couple of years, most of that is going to be market rate housing. So most of that is going to be to the 100% or 80% and above AMI, just market rate. We need to be able to show that we're accommodating 80% below. And so we really can't count these 900 some units that are either been built since 2020 or are coming down the pipeline. Because of that, we have to look at ways to accommodate even more capacity in order to show that we have the capacity to accommodate for the 0 to 80%. And how do we do that? We make sure that, I'll go to the next slide real quick and I'll come back to this one. We look at what does our zoning allow for and what alternatives do we have? So if apartments and multiplexes are the more affordable option and accessory dwelling units are the more affordable option, then we need to be able to demonstrate that our zoning allows for multiplexes, apartments, and ADUs. Well, the state, as we know, adopted some regulations that require us to make accommodations for duplexes, for example, at least 2 units per lot, at least 2 ADUs per lot. And so that begins to increase our capacity. So what ends up happening is we increase our capacity and then we can demonstrate that we can accommodate these income levels. What you're looking at here are alternative 1, alternative 2, and alternative 3. So as we update our comp plan, we have to do an environmental impact statement and we have to have alternatives to examine. And these alternatives will ultimately become a preferred alternative, but for planning purposes, we need to have 3 distinct alternatives to examine those potential impacts and kind of weigh out the options. Ultimately, the council will decide on a preferred alternative that will be a combination of potentially all 3. When I say that, when you look at alternative 2 and alternative 3, these are the proposed policy changes that could happen through the comp plan process. And we've done some of these things already. Well, I shouldn't say we've done some of these things already. We've done some of this, but these are mostly changes that we're asking for. Do we, and I want to, and I'll just kind of walk through them real quick. Increasing affordable incentives in our town center in East Sumner. Allowing, we're required by state to allow for at least 2 units per residential lot and 2 ADUs per lot. Do we want to encourage more small apartments in our medium density and high density residential areas? Do we want to allow at least 4 units on large lots like LDR 8.5, LDR 12? Do we want to have policies that support more for religious organizations to build affordable apartments? We actually have worked some of that into our housing action plan already. And then we're also looking at more housing growth in the town center in East Sumner, but also potentially areas like anticipating maybe some of the mining sites building out in the future. Alternative 3 would kind of push the envelope, I think, where we would require affordable housing in the town center in East Sumner, require higher densities in medium density residential, and then the 4 units for larger lots, and then housing and growth, again, focused in town center and East Sumner. So these are like some different options we have to pick from. And like I said, the preferred alternative is going to be some combination thereof. And ultimately, we'll be able to demonstrate that we have capacity for all income bands based on that. Yes.
Can you explain this? I'm confused.
Yes, so our consultants have taken a look at some of the options that I went through on the other slide. And they've put the numbers to our zoning and our land capacity, and they've come up with these being potential options for gaining the capacity that we're talking about. So so if we were to implement some of the changes that are in these this list, alternative 2 would end up with, you know, capacity for 781 housing units that would be affordable to 80% or less AMI capacity, and alternative 3 would be 312. And so your totals increase to bring us to be able to show that we can accommodate those income bands.
They do nothing at the moment.
That's correct. No action is number 1, which puts us out of compliance with GMA because we're showing a deficit.
If I could just back up and remind everybody, this is part of our, yes, the state adopted affordability standards based on income, right? You have to do this many housing units, but this is actually part of our 2024 comprehensive plan update. And this EIS alternative, these alternates that we have to go through, is a normal planning process. It's not something that, you know, hey, Ryan and Jason just figured we better do this. It's actually part of the normal comp plan update. And we always evaluate these alternatives as part of that process.
Yep.
This time, though, it takes on a little bit of a new meaning because we have these these income targets that we've never had to hit before as a city. And talking to my colleagues, and I know Ryan's talked to his too, throughout the county, everybody is struggling with how do we meet these income bands? And unfortunately, we're all kind of landing on the same thing. The only way to do it is unfortunately upzone a whole lot to get to the densities required to hit those 80% and below.
Go ahead, Cindy. I'll get you next. Sure.
Okay, so my question is, I understand you want to, or there's going to be rezoning and all that. But if you require a certain thing at a certain piece of property, we can't demand that someone comes and builds that particular thing.
Correct.
So this also could stymie things, because if someone they want that piece of property, but unless they're going to build something that is affordable, which sometimes always doesn't make money for the developer, then I can see that we could be stymied in lots of places. So I understand that they're trying to make more housing and all that, but it just seems a little forced in the fact that the free market has a lot to do with it. Who builds what, who wants what, and all that, and we can't control that. We can set out a map, but I just don't want to see us doing so much that we just, all I can think of is word stymie, just stymie ourselves by the changes that we've made. I mean, the housing market, it used to be that people had a home, they lived in it until it fit them, it got older, and they moved to a little upgraded, and this house was available at a better rate of rent or buying. And we've sort of lost the normal progression of how housing things worked. And I don't know if we can create it by making rules and maps that say this has to happen. So I don't know. I don't envy you on having to try to figure out what you think will work best for Sumner, but I can just see that I don't think this is an ideal process is what my comment. So
Yeah, I agree with you, Councilman Roxter. It's definitely challenging. And one of the things that has been down is production. When you talk about, more units coming on the market, somebody buying into a, they're trading up to a nicer home or bigger home. And then that opens up their home for somebody else to purchase, maybe a first-time home buyer. What we've run into is the production hasn't been keeping up. So the supply overall is down. And then, of course, there's financial issues and interest rates and all that keep people from moving up and moving out and creating that. But that's part of the overall solution, is to get the supply and production moving as well. And then your comment about stymieing development, I think that's a possibility, right? If there's mandatory, it's on the list as an option just to study it. But in my opinion, if it's mandatory affordability, like you have to have 20% of the units at affordable to 80% or less of AMI, there's a potential you don't get anything built. Because the developer will add it up and go, I can't make money with this. You provide it as an incentive, like we have the East Sumner Apartments, the developer has chosen to do the multifamily tax exemption, then they're either going to build it, they're going to do it. But I'm afraid if you make it mandatory, in some markets like Redmond, they can make it mandatory and they're still getting housing. But I'm not going to recommend that for Sumner. I think we would just stymie development.
And also, I almost think we're chasing our tail on some of these on what things afford for rent. I mean, rent is going up so fast that I don't think we can get to what, I just don't see how we can get that. If it was steady, level, we could predict, we could, all these things that was predictable on how it was going to go. But I just see us chasing our tail on things being affordable. I mean, I probably couldn't afford to go rent an apartment, as almost a 70-year-old woman, that's had income their whole life. So, I don't know how we can get apartment rents down to a reasonable amount for people who have not even had home ownership yet. So I just think there's so many variables that it's just scary, but
there's definitely a lot of variables. And what we're trying to do is demonstrate that we've created the opportunity to build the type of units that are most likely to be affordable, right? So if you create an opportunity to build more duplexes, for example, those typically rent more affordably than a single family house, then now you've created potentially a more affordable option. But yeah, that's kind of all we can do is lay the groundwork. And there's other, aspects to affordability, permit processes and fees. And there's lots of other aspects to affordability, not the least of which is labor and material costs, right? As a developer comes in and has to put a house together. But the city's responsibility is to demonstrate that we've zoned things accordingly. We allow certain types of housing that's more likely to be affordable to the income bands that the state is asking us to target.
I just want to say, I would want us to be as conservative as we could.
Yeah, understood. And I can guarantee you, when we went through this process of allocation, I walked in the room and said, we have done a ton of work. We have a town center plan that has a lot of capacity. We have an East Sumner plan that has a lot of capacity. And I was not interested and did not take on any more housing units than that. And then come back and the state's like, well, you also need to demonstrate that you can meet all these income bands. And when you look at the market rate stuff that's coming down the pipeline, it's not going to meet the requirement for income affordability. That's why we're in here having this conversation. And like I said, these are three alternatives that are going to get looked at in the EIS, in the draft EIS. The final EIS will have what's called the preferred alternative. And that's where it'll refine all three of them really and come up with a preferred that can be as conservative as we can make it and still meet our requirements.
Councilmember Newman.
Go ahead. I was just say one question that staff gets asked on a regular basis. Well, what if we didn't do this? What if our plan wasn't compliant with GMA? And the short answer is, well, we don't get state shared revenues anymore. And that's significant. Most of our budget is state shared revenues when it comes to our transportation projects. So it is very significant that our plan complies with GMA. There's a lot of consequences that come with that. So.
Yep. And it will at the end of the day. I believe.
Thanks. Did the state make any distinctions between rent versus homeownership in rules and numbers that we're supposed to meet?
No, only in, generalities, when you go back to that very first slide I showed you, well, the very first one, but the one with the state numbers, where we're really not focused so much on single family, because typically what's affordable is going to be in a multiplex or an apartment. Not to say that the council hasn't taken steps to make home ownership more affordable. Council adopted the ability to subdivide a townhouse, an attached townhouse off onto its own lot and sell that. And you can imagine with, less land and everything, it's more affordable home ownership option than a single family house on a single family lot. If that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm wondering if examples help. I'm trying to remember, I may not know the details, but is there a new complex being built like across from the YMCA
Eventually, yeah, there's one, they're in for permits,
for roughly how many units?
roughly 250.
250, and are any of them affordable housing?
No, the developer doing that said they're gonna just do market rate.
Okay, so I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, first of all, I very much appreciate comp plans and going through EIS process, but also kind of I'm wondering how much land supply is left by the time we get to decisions made. Like, so that's 250 units and none of them going toward affordable housing. And so I don't want to irresponsibly throw out crazy ideas, but this is a rare situation where I actually am open to reasons about why this is a terrible idea, but why we might actually want to require affordable housing in some areas, like as opposed to opening the entire city up to higher density, instead of going a sweep across with high density, knowing that there's no assurances that any of it would go toward affordable housing. So we would basically we could have apartments and everywhere with our transportation may not be able to accommodate it. It might be worth considering in smaller areas. Yeah, but talking to developers who might be willing to do it, like, because Cindy, I agree with you that you don't want it, like, if no one will build it, then kind of what is the point? But I think there are some that are willing to build it. I mean, because in another area, we are going to get some, like the incentive was enough. So before all of the land is eaten up toward market rates, it might be a consideration doing it in just small pockets, just so that we have something to show for it at the end of the day.
Well, and that's kind of alternative 3 up here, mandatory affordability in the town center in East Sumner. So that would be requiring like 20, the proposal would be requiring 20% of the units be affordable to moderate, low income households in town center in East Sumner. Right now, East Sumner, if you do the MFTE, you can get affordable. You can get an MFTE credit for doing affordable. In the town center, you have the option to do an MFTE for market rate, and it's an 8-year exemption, or affordable, which is a 12-year exemption. One of the options would be just to make it allowed in town center for affordable units, or you just flat out require it. I mean, that's anyhow, what I guess, Councilmember, what I'm saying is this is what alternative 3 captures, is requiring affordability in town center and East Sumner. And I think the risk you run is you might not get any development. Because when we presented the MFTE option to the developers doing the 250 units across from the Y, as well as the developers doing the Red Apple and the other site, they said, we're not interested, or we'll do the market rate option for one reason or another. Yeah.
There's one more question.
Okay.
The other is, can you think of, are there any other incentives out there that appeal to developers in addition to MTFEs?
Well, I mean, we can look at, fee reductions, density bonuses, which we put into our senior housing changes, allow you to go to 50 dwelling units to the acre if you do senior housing. So there's a few other tools in the toolbox for sure. I personally think the MFTE is
The biggest one.
a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Kurt, did you have any question? Anybody else? Okay.
So I was curious about duplexes, any kind of multiplex. So typically, from what I've seen, they are near single family residents. So
Mhm.
it's two different types of zoning. I mean, wouldn't it, to me, it seems like it would make sense that if we would allow like a rezone that was, something that was a single family resident to be a duplex or a triplex or something. How do you see something like that happening, or is that part of the, I guess I'm asking if that's part
Yeah,
of this
for sure.
plan?
Yeah, so recent state law required us, the city, all cities, to allow at least 2 units on any lot where you permit single family, typically single family residential. And so now, I mean, we haven't adopted our code changes yet, but ultimately, the code would allow for a duplex to be built or a house to be converted to a duplex on any lot where you have single family homes typically now. Does that make sense?
That
So
does.
it's going to allow for that kind of increase. It also would allow for 2 accessory dwelling units on those same properties, right? So you could have a duplex, or you could have accessory dwelling units as well. So I think and the reason the reason the legislature focused on accessory dwelling units is because typically those are more affordable to rent. And there's also different life circumstances that make ADUs desirable. Maybe you have an aging and ailing parent, or you have a returning college student and you're looking for affordable housing options, and an ADU can make that work. So yeah, long story short, you're right on point with where the state has been headed with allowing for density increases in what were typically pretty much just single family. So.
Okay, great, thank you.
Right. Anybody else before we go on?
So next steps, as we've mentioned a couple of times, we are in the midst of updating the comp plan. Right now, it's going through planning commission review, and I can assure you they've had lots of questions and gone into a lot of detail around the housing policy. And so we'll work through that, and by next late winter, early spring, we'll be getting back in front of council with planning commission recommendation and going deep dive again into it with council. I just kind of want to lay the groundwork for what's coming.
Thank you, Ryan.
Well, those last two, the complete draft comprehensive
Mhm.
plan, is that in 24 or 23?
Yes, thank you.
Both of them.
Yes, 24.
Okay.
Sorry. March 2024. And yep, correct.
Just one more, Mark.
One more.
How long do you think it'll take for developers to change their mind over? Like, we've given incentives and they're just saying, no, thank you. What is going to make it so that they feel like that's the pattern that their business now has to turn to?
Mhm.
I mean, do you see any inkling from developers that they understand that these requirements are going to make the whole market change?
I don't know if anybody's completely absorbed, what this might look like rolling out in the future. My personal opinion is the allowance for duplexes in single family zones and the allowance for ADUs quite generously. I think it's going to create a situation where small investors are going to see the potential. Not unlike Airbnbs, right? Where people build a unit, or they have one and they're renting a house. I'm not saying they're gonna be Airbnbs. I'm just saying that I think people will start to add it up and go, if we can do an ADU and it supplements our income, they're gonna look at their life circumstances and say, this makes sense. And you're gonna see an uptick in investment. How much and does it accomplish what we wanted to accomplish? I don't know. But I think we're gonna see an uptick in small investors taking advantage of these ADU and duplex allowances.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say something in response to Cindy's question. The only time when I've seen it with developers making changes, like say, like energy efficiency, like things that have been resisted in the past, is when areas sort of, I don't want to say joined together, but the more it became the standard, the more they accepted that it would be the case. This is where I think regionalism is really important, like getting other jurisdictions on board with setting similar standards, I think is gonna be critical. And so I don't know if it's something that SHAPE can also take up moving forward in terms of planting seeds with other jurisdictions, like not just the large cities to have the affordable housing requirements and whatnot, because once Milton and Edgewood and Bonnie Lake, once they all do it, then developers have fewer, if the requirement's gonna be the same everywhere, then they're happy to go there.
All right,
All right, well, thank you.
is that it?
That's all I have.
Wow. Such an interesting topic.
Did you say that with a straight face?
No, I can't. I can't. All right, we will move on to the city administrator report.
Thank you, Mayor. Coming up tomorrow night is our fall open house. We have a lot of projects that we'll be discussing with the public that shows up. Also joining us will be some of our partners, regional partners, including Sound Transit, the Pierce County Library District, and the school district. They'll be here as well. And also next week, Monday, the 2nd, there's no meeting. It's been canceled due to lack of agenda items. It's also Monday Night Football, but I assure you that has nothing to do with why we canceled the meeting. We canceled it weeks ago when we saw we had a little lapse here. So enjoy next Monday off.
All right. Okay. I have one thing. First, let's do agenda setting. Do we have any issues with agendas? Setting anything? What do you have?
The CD committee has been canceled.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody else?
I can't make it to SHAPE. That's the first Friday of the month or the subsequent meetings. But I want to plant the seed. I think someone here can. If we need an alternate, I don't know how it works yet. I haven't talked to them.
Thank you. I think we have that covered, right?
Yeah, per the interlocal, it's the mayor's appointment, and so the mayor's going to cover at least to the end of the year, and then we'll figure it out.
And we'll go into it next year.
Call me if you want to.
Okay. And how about council committees? Anybody have any issues on council committees? All right, seeing none. So I have something to give to, I heard this was your last meeting. And so we're gonna miss you. And we want to give you this.
Thank you. There's no reply. Thank you. Thank you very much.
What is it? A cribbage cord?
Yeah.
I need my dad this weekend. Thank you. I'm sending out an email. I've worked on 3 different drafts and it probably won't be sufficient, but for those of you who don't know, I am moving and out of the area, actually out of the state. And so therefore can't serve because of legal requirements. Otherwise I would phone in all the time.
Well, at least you have something to hang on your new wall.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so no executive session. And I will say, meeting adjourned at 7:04.
Okay, so.
Going too far into the weeds.
Just